Welcome to the reading vlog for James by Percival Everett. So whenever I do reading vlogs, I basically just pick up the camera whenever I have thoughts and want to talk about them to the camera, I guess. So for this book, I'm not going to be really cautious about spoilers. I don't go into like full plot details. I don't recap things. I mostly just like give my commentary, my thoughts on things. But it depends how sensitive you are to spoilers. If you've not read James, I am going to be talking about themes a lot in this vlog, and I might discuss some particular plot beats, and I might give some information so that way some of my thoughts make sense in the vlog. What do I know about James before going into James? So I know this is I want to use the word retelling. It is a telling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective. And I know that it is very popular right now and it is being nominated for a lot of awards. So I hadn't read anything by Mark Twain before this is becoming popular and all of that. So before reading James, I did read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I did want to, have that base knowledge before jumping into James. So I have read that, and now I am ready to start James. In Huckleberry Finn, Jim and Huck have a conversation where Jim does not understand about different languages. Specifically, he does not understand that people from France would speak a different language. And in this book, Jim is familiar with the philosophies of Voltaire, Rousseau, and Locke. Like, at this point, I would not be surprised if Jim speaks French and is just making out to not know anything about it. I am called Jim. I have yet to choose a name. Why do I have a feeling that's going to be important? Like, this might be a story of self-discovery. Of figuring out who you are when you don't have to be who people tell you you're supposed to be. Maybe that's why the book's called James instead of Jim. Okay, so they just have a conversation where Huck is saying, why does Pap hate me? And then Jim is saying, I'm going to call him Jim until we know his new name. Jim is saying, oh, hate's a strong word. And then Huck is like, well, he hates you too. And then Jim is like, of course he hates me, I'm a slave. And Huck says, no, he has a special hate for you. So my very first thought is Jim is acting like a father figure to Huck, and maybe Huck's dad doesn't like that and he doesn't like being replaced. My second thought is they've made comment a couple times about Jim's light skin. And he said he's a slave because his mom was a slave, and that's why he's a slave. Are Jim and Huck related in this book? I know they aren't, or at least they make no comment on that in the original Huck Finn, but it's a thought. It's a thought. It might have nothing to do with that. It might just be Jim is like a father figure to Huck, and Huck's dad doesn't like being replaced. I don't know, just a theory. I think am I looking into things too hard? Maybe, but there's a reason this conversation was included in the book. Jim is officially more intelligent, more studied, more learned than I am, because I had to look up who Kierkegaard was. New day, still reading James. First off, he has chosen the name James, so that's what we're going to call him from now on. Secondly, we have this wonderful sentence. With my pencil, I wrote myself into being. I wrote myself to here. It's good. I have read a good bit of James since we talked last. And we have officially gotten to like a point in the story where this is different from Huck Finn. They are taking the story in a new direction. However, I did just read Huck Finn, and just before I read James, I read Huck Finn for the first time. And Huck Finn is written by Huck himself. Obviously, the book isn't actually written by Huck. Huck is a fictional character, but the framing of the story of Huck Finn is written by Huck himself. So there is a good part in the second half of Huck Finn where James is not with Huck. They are separated for a period of time in the second half of the story. So obviously this book is going to follow James as he whatever happens during that time. Now, the way they split up in the second half of the story is different than the way they split up in Huck Finn. However, because Huck Finn is written by Huck, and this story, I guess, is written by James, it's not impossible for them to have different, say, interpretations of events. Also, the way Huck and James split up in this kind of looks negatively on Huck, or might be like an uncomfortable or just like an unpleasant memory for Huck. It's not impossible to say that Huck changed that part of the story or just doesn't want to write that part of the story in because he doesn't want to talk about it. So I'm just saying, we can still so far align these books up and say there's a reason, even within the original, that this could be a valid interpretation of what happens in the story. Really interesting to see what all James is getting up to while he's separated from Huck. This is definitely part of the story where this book can basically take it anywhere, because it doesn't have to follow the original at all, and it's still all plausible because we don't know what James was doing when him and Huck were separated. And this part of the story also is focusing again a lot on like identity, and then I feel like particularly in this part it focuses on colorism, and then just like prejudice too. Just, oh my gosh, so much. So he's been sold to the minstrel people, and they are like putting on shows in blackface, and they're like, yeah, you can totally join us and put on blackface and like basically pretend to be a white man for a bit, but you also have to be like extremely careful people don't find out that you're actually white, because you're going to places where black people are not allowed. And he also meets another member who claims to be black, but looks very white, is very white passing. And I just feel like, James himself is a light-skinned black man. They're also like putting on blackface and being like characters of like darker skinned black men, and then just like that whole like identity, prejudice, colorism thing. And on top of that, James' time with the minstrels is also interesting because James was sold to them. And he talks about this. He has a conversation. So Emmett is kind of like the lead person in the minstrels. And James has a conversation with Emmett. And, James can earn money, but he has to like pay Emmett back the amount that he was bought for in order to like buy his freedom, I guess. But Emmett is very insistent that James is not actually a slave. And then James asks the question, so you're making a distinction between chattel slavery and bonded slavery. And then Emmett's like, what is that? Would you mind repeating that? And then James is like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to repeat that. And like, honestly, whenever I first read this, I was like, James is being very reckless in his like line of questioning here. Like James knows better. He's very intelligent. He knows to be very cautious about this kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think that's kind of the point of that scene, because James is trying to figure out what he can do as a runaway. And like if he stays with the minstrels, he can make money, he can earn his freedom, he is a slave despite them not calling it slavery. And he can make money, and then maybe he can make enough money to also like buy his family. And that is something James wants to do. But it's also showing like James, what are his options as a runaway? And he doesn't have great options. And his options are like, oh, these people are nicer to him, they are treating him better, but he's still a slave. And even as a runaway, even in these better positions, he still doesn't have the freedom to like be himself. He still has to be careful. He has to be cautious about what he says, how he talks, how he acts around these people. Yeah, I don't know. I just think the exploration in this section is interesting. Like where they can go here with a story because like none of this was in the original, and then they can like just explore more elements and layers of this world of what life would have been like. I have read more of James, and I put it aside for a few minutes, and I'm having a realization. We are at the point where James and what's the guy's name? Norman. Norman sold James, and then James is gonna like run away and meet him again, and James runs away with Sammy. Guys, I don't know if this book is going to circle around to the end of Huck Finn. Like, I feel like it is, right? Like, it's eventually going to circle around back to the end of Huck Finn. And what I'm hoping is it goes beyond the end and tells us more of his story rather than just going to, like, the end of Huck Finn. But Sammy is not in Huck Finn. Sammy is not in Huck Finn, and I'm just like, oh no. No. If we're like introducing new characters now at this stage, like this can't be good. This, like, I want good things to happen to these characters, and now I'm worried. Like, okay, what's gonna happen to Sammy? For that matter, what's gonna happen to Norman? No, because I'm invested in Norman's story now, because he wants to go back and like buy his family. Same as James does. Guys, this can't end well. I hate being right. Oh, you guys, this line, okay? So James is having a conversation with John Locke again because he's a very intelligent man who has conversations with philosophers, okay? And imagine it all as a state of war, Locke said. You have been conquered, and so long as the war continues, you shall be a slave. When does it end, I ask? Does it end? That's the question. Who gets to say it's over? A war continues until the victor says it's over. He has a good point. Because a victor could just, like, continue being endlessly cruel. Okay. That's all. Another quote for you all. If one knows hell as home, then is returning to hell a homecoming? But then it goes on, but I'm going to start over because it's such it's the beginning of a chapter and it's such a powerful line. If one knows hell as home, then is returning to hell a homecoming? Even in hell, were there such a place, one would know where the fires were just a little cooler, where the rocks were just a little less jagged, And so it was in my hell. There was my family, and there was the bad things, the cesspit, the controlling overseer. If one knows hell as home, then is returning to hell a homecoming. I finished James, and it was really good. I liked it. Oh my gosh, I have a lot of thoughts though. So, the end of James actually reminds me a fair amount of the movie Django Unchained. And I think that's because they have the same themes at the end. Throughout, maybe it's a little bit different. They definitely are telling different stories, all of that stuff. But I think like right at the end, the reason the end is the way it is and the point is the same. So, the end of James is different from the end of Huckleberry Finn. And I also think that's intentional. The end of James gives James a lot more agency. And I think that's the point. James is very smart. James is very capable. He's in a bad situation. He leaves. He did not intend to meet up with Huck, to meet up with Norman, to meet up with anyone else on his journey. And he is perfectly willing to work with people and to do whatever it takes to get freedom, to get his family, to be united with his family, to get freedom, all of that stuff. And he's not just going to leave. He's not just saying, I found freedom and I'm not caring about other people. He's going to find a way to get his family freedom, and he wants true freedom. He wants more than just what he had with the minstrels, what he had just on the river with Huck. He's looking for more than that. He wants true freedom. And he's very capable of doing whatever it takes. And he's willing to work with people along the way, but it doesn't mean that he absolutely needs their help or is relying on their help. And I guess in some ways, I feel like this book and Django Unchained subvert the white savior trope. Because they're willing to work with white people, but they don't require white people to come and save them. And it's showing that they have the power, the means, the agency themselves to accomplish their goals, to get freedom. And it's really interesting too, because in James met a slave who, I don't know if I would say like he's okay with slavery, but he's going to be the one who tattles to the master if you're trying to run away. He's not a trustworthy person. So it would be the case that there would be people like that. Like no group is a monolith. And kind of the same thing happened in Django Unchained too, where like Django met another slave that was like that. And he was like, you're a slave too. Like, don't you want the same things? Don't you want freedom? But that slave is going to, go tattle to the master and be like, oh, this guy's trying to get away. This guy's trying to pull one on you, So James ends up like meeting someone like that. And so he knows like he can't like just 100% trust someone just because they're also a slave. But he's also like not going to let that stop him. And then he's going to, do what he needs to. I guess I'm going to say this to you. Reading the end of Huckleberry Finn. So at the end of Huckleberry Finn, Jim is caught because he was a runaway, and then like he was caught, and then I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I think it might have been like the woman he was with died and then like freed him upon her death or something like that. So like he did get his freedom in the end. But in the meantime, Huck finds out that James has been caught and then like plots to help James escape. And then he connects with Tom Sawyer and gets like Tom Sawyer in on it. And I was so frustrated at Tom Sawyer that I didn't even really put together that like, is this a white savior trope? Is it like, oh, Jim really needs a white person to come and save him and help him get freedom? And then at the very end, it was like it didn't even matter. And the reason Tom Sawyer was okay going along with it is because like James was basically already a free man. So like Tom helping Jim escape, because he's only called Jim in the first one. Tom helping Jim escape didn't basically have any consequences. So like Tom didn't take it seriously. I was so frustrated with Tom at the end of that book. Oh my gosh. But I think maybe that's why I like also like didn't realize like is there some like white savior tropes going on in here, and James just like completely subverts that, and it's like James has the ability himself to free himself, and he's going to take matters into his own hands and do whatever it takes to accomplish that. So I also like I wish there was an epilogue. I wish like it went further, because like I hope everything worked out great in the end. But like it's also it's so hard, because like Norman doesn't get a happy ending, and so many people in the story don't get a happy ending, and like that's also real life. There were real people that took big risks and didn't get happy endings, and it's like, because I read this book and I'm attached to these characters, like I want them to have happy endings, but like that's what we should want for people in real life. And I don't know. Sorry, now I'm just like processing, because it's like, okay, how can we get justice today for things that are happening bad today? How can we ensure a better world going forward? And I think that's part of the thing that like just frustrates me, because I feel like there's so much injustice, and I don't know how. It just becomes overwhelming. But that doesn't mean we don't try. That doesn't mean we don't do the little part that we can. Like, I am aware of that. It's just, okay. I don't want to end this on like a down note. I don't know. It's just, it is something I think about, like whenever I read these types of books. It's like, you know, it's easy to get mad at the injustice then, and then it would be easy to be like, oh, America doesn't have slavery the same way anymore, so it's fine. We're like so far past that. But like, okay, but what injustices are happening today? And what can we do to make the world a better place? Anyway, it was a really good book. It was thought-provoking. It was, I think, a lot of my, I guess, enjoyment that I got from this book was the fact that I was comparing it to Huckleberry Finn. I do wonder a little bit, like, would I have enjoyed this book to the extent that I did? Or would I had enjoyed this book at all if I was not directly comparing it to Huckleberry Finn the entire time? Because, like, I do think a lot of my enjoyment, I don't know if enjoyment's the right word, but, like, a lot of what makes this book work for me is comparing it to that, is that like base story. But I think this book stands on its own pretty well too. So I don't know, like I definitely think you could just jump into this without reading Huckleberry Finn. I definitely think you could. Oh, just one other little thing. So I was right. This book did make James and Huck related, which was not the case in the first book at all. I don't have strong feelings about that either way, honestly. So I did guess. No, it didn't just make them related. It made it like James is Huck's father. Which also explains like why it was so important that James was light-skinned, although we also go into a little bit of that in like the colorism section too. So I was right. I guess you could say that. I was right. They were related. I don't have strong feelings either way. This is a divergence from the original. And I do find it interesting. So, like, James lets Huck know that in this book. But then at the end, like, he escapes with his slave family. And he's like, Huck will be fine. In fact, he goes, Huck actually never needed to know who his father was. and Huck would have been fine anyway. And James basically told Huck for James. So it was like a selfish reason that he told him. Maybe I need to think on that one a little bit more. See if there's any like more strings I can pull on that one. I guess I just like don't actually have strong feelings about that particular plot point. But anyway, it was a good book. Thanks for reading along or following along my reading journey. And you can let me know what you thought of it if you read it, if you have more thoughts on any of this stuff. Bye.